sun, here comes the sun. I say it's alright. Little darling,
it is morning in America. Good morning, welcome back, everybody. Sorry, tripping on my words. I'm going to get out of the way and let our guest speak. In any case, Dr. Michael Welner, forensic psychiatrist, chairman of the forensic panel. And this morning we want to emphasize his work as the architect of the depravity scale. Dr. Welner's practice in New York and surrounding areas. Good morning, Dr. Welner.
Good morning, Bill. Very nice to be back with you, and hope you've been doing well these days. We've all been busy, but I miss you.
Yeah, I missed you too, and that's why we called you, because it was time to talk to you. So thank you very much. I want to talk about ISIS and related phenomena. Two questions. One is, we have been witnessing here on TV and video and internet a level of depravity, a word you know better than most. We don't usually see the beheading of people, children, burying people alive, crucifixions. I have two questions. One, the second one really frightens me, but the first one is, does this kind of thing go on a lot, all the time? We just don't see it, and ISIS just likes to publicize it for whatever odd reasons it has. And the second question, does this have appeal to people? Aristotle says man seeks the good. Is this a recruiting tool in some bizarre, depraved way?
Well, there are a number of very important things for us all to just get oriented to in engaging this that are perhaps beyond our view where we sit here in America. And it illustrates the complexity of the problem, not only from a behavioral standpoint, how we react to it, but how others in the Muslim world react to it, and also those who are recruited. First of all, we have to get away from the notion that the idea of Islamist and Islamofascism and political Islam it means the same thing to every movement. ISIS is very different from the fascism of Iran. And there's the key difference explains ISIS's success. What ISIS has tapped into is the notion of the Islamic Caliphate. And for those who are devout Muslims, they are very vulnerable, very sensitive to the idea that a caliphate is required in order for a Muslim to adequately observe their faith. And it's the equivalent of what we've seen in other faiths of false messiahs. That the notion of a messiah, if you can carry it off, is so powerful that it gives the movement, for those who subscribe to it, the entitlement to say, come and join. And part of what gives the caliphate the opportunity to declare itself is that it has land. And that's what's always distinguished ISIS from Al-Qaeda. Yeah. Al-Qaeda may have some of the same ideological orientation, but it isn't just about the idea of come and behead people. It's we have land, we want to establish a caliphate. It's the equivalent of saying we're building Mecca or we're building something holy. Come and fight for it. So people are fighting for a cause, and that's why they're joining. They're not joining because of YouTube. They're not joining because of social media.
Okay.
Social media only enables them to be reached and to be energized to go beyond themselves and to get caught up in something messianic.
Okay. Then my question is, back to my first question, is the sort of thing we've seen, and I've described it, beheading, burying children alive, et cetera, et cetera. Does this kind of thing go on all the time in the world, we just don't see it, or is this pretty unusual?
Well, the reality is that it does. There are far more people who are beheaded by governments, for example, like Saudi Arabia, and other countries who nominally or perhaps more than nominally adhere to Muslim teaching. And the idea of beheadings and stonings and even setting people on fire is totally consistent with Muslim teaching. And this is one of the problems within the Muslim world. We think we're the only ones who are politically correct. The political correctness that exists within the Muslim world is such that while these kinds of actions, when they're broadcast to the world in an obnoxious way, in an outrageous way, in a provocative way, may be embarrassing to Muslims who are secularized. At the same time, they recognize that because it is in line with the Quran and not at all inconsistent with ISIS's claim that it is a purified strain of Islam, they can't criticize it. That's the political correctness. The pushback against ISIS from within the Muslim world isn't just because there's death and destruction of Muslims killing Muslims. It's because the leaders themselves are threatened. It's because Jordan recognizes that the kingdom is imperiled. And so when those in power, when the Saudis recognize that their reign is threatened, it isn't beheadings because they know beheadings, because they do beheadings.
Yeah.
But ISIS can claim the high road because they say, hey, listen, we're following the Quran to the letter. Come and join us. And it freezes devout Muslims who say, well, they kind of are.
Yeah, okay. No, I think it's important to bring up in this context, talking about ISIS, it's important to remind people about President Abdullah, King Abdullah, and even President Sisi, who, he's no picnic, but, they're going to fight back against this stuff. But if you've said, as you said, Dr. Welner, that the task here is to be a good Muslim and thus to establish the Caliphate, are then these things like beheadings and burying people alive just an unpleasant means to the end and we just sort of look past them? Or is there any appeal per se in these things to the young, unhinged, or even not unhinged male?
The beheadings and the stonings and the killings that are going on regularly are reflecting essentially an ethnic cleansing that is going on right now in the Arab world, where Muslims who feel that they are the pure example are essentially doing what Pol Pot was doing in Cambodia, to get rid of a segment of the population in order to create the kind of population, the kind of Muslims that they want. The shocking nature of it, the broadcast of it, intimidates people into not fighting.
Okay.
It intimidates the West into not fighting.
Yeah, I guess
and yet,
maybe.
At the end of the day, pardon?
I guess maybe. Yeah, go ahead.
And so it's designed to do that. It is propaganda by design. The idea of it's done in accordance with law, but the way it's done is in order to send a message and to get people to freeze and to be afraid to fight.
Okay. Michael Welner's our guest, forensic psychiatrist. Let me come at this another way. We saw the news story, Dr. Welner, of the three young women, 14, 15, 16. You saw them leaving from London, going off to Istanbul, and then from there into Syria, Iraq, and to join up with ISIS. The only thing that would make sense to a lot of Americans and a lot of commentators was they don't know what they're getting into. They are so young and naive, they don't know what they're getting into. My fear was that they knew exactly what they were getting into.
And you're right. Because we're not seeing the whole picture. All we're seeing of ISIS is the beheadings. But what they are seeing of ISIS is essentially nation building, saying, come, help us build a nation. We need doctors. We need engineers.
Okay.
We need people who want to live in this pure messianic society where you will achieve your spiritual purification by serving the Caliphate. And that's where they're going.
Okay.
They're going as any nationalist and identified people would go to start something ideal, and that's what's being tapped into. They're not watching beheading videos and running there saying, I want to go behead someone. We're only getting a part of the picture, and that's why it's working for them.
But it's not a pause either. It doesn't make them pause, I take it. That is, to go to establish the Caliphate, and you watch these things, you see what they do. A lot of people, I think would say and would think, I think I'm going to pause on this. I was going to join because I really would like to see a Caliphate, but wait a minute. I don't want to be part of a group that does this.
And those people are not inspired to join, but the alternative view is, I am devout. I want to be part of a pure Islam, and one that we haven't had for 1,000 years, and purification by getting rid of infidels and unbelievers is a necessary evil, and it's something that's prescribed by the Quran. So I'm going to live the Quran. I don't expect myself to behead someone, but I'm going to live by the law, and I shouldn't have any problems under the circumstances. Don't forget they're offering free health care, jobs. From a social welfare standpoint, that also gets promised. And the idea of nation building is being ignored in the West. So this is far more than the idea of al-Qaeda, even though it's outside of its influence because it's so outlandish in some of its methods.
All right. I was going to make fun of Jobs program. I think I still may when we come back, but we'll press on this further. That is the notion that they're joining because they want job security. I fear it's something worse than that. But I may be missing something very important here. We'll be back with Dr. Michael Welner. Fascinating stuff. Welcome your calls. Dr. Welner's generously offered to stay another segment, so we'll get to your questions of him, and let's self-regulate and make the questions for Dr. Welner on this topic, this intriguing topic. We'll have time to talk. I want to come back to ISIS, the Caliphate, and the slaughters, etc. But first, you were saying on break you're involved in some cases. You can tell us about. Maybe some of our audience is familiar with some of this.
Well, some of them are not yet public record, but certainly what I'm up to my neck in right now is the New York trial of the person who's accused of kidnapping and killing Eitan Pate, who was missing for so many years and has never been found. It really illustrates just the difficult challenge of forensic psychiatry. So these are always very difficult issues to sort through, and I respect. I respect our taking our time to sip it like coffee. Good.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us in on that. So the dream of the Caliphate, which is part of the faith here, the true believer, means that you look what? You tell me what the right phrase is, Dr. Welner. You look the other way. You say, well, the end justifies the means. I'm not really for beheadings, but, this is the way we get there. I think of that stupid old joke I learned when I was a kid about the kamikaze pilots. The guys announces to all the future kamikaze pilots, and you go up in your plane, you're loaded with explosives, you aim your plane toward the American ship, and it blows up, and you die for the glory of Japan. Any questions? The guy says, what are you, out of your mind? I mean, if someone promises me the Caliphate and says, here it is, and we get there, gates of paradise, all you have to do is cut people's heads off, crucify them, rape the women, have total disregard for human life, I'm going to pause, aren't I? Aren't I going to pause and say, wait a minute, that ain't no way to build a caliphate that's worthy?
Well, I think we have to appreciate, those of us who are not as familiar with Islam as others, that the idea of a caliphate runs to the core of the idealized version of Islam and its own revival. There has not been a caliphate for 1,000 years, and al-Baghdadi, who declared himself to be the caliph, is actually from the appropriate family line of Muhammad. And so there is a certain street credibility that he has had among some in declaring himself to be a caliph and the head of the caliphate. The significance of that is, within Islam, if you fulfill your obligations to the caliphate, and that means go to the caliphate and serve, then you will have fulfilled your obligations to the most pure degree, and otherwise you will die ignorant. So for someone who's extremely devout, if they believe in what he's pitching, that's why this is very much like something messianic. Well, then they're going to buy into it. Now, of course, there are those who do not believe in him, and yet at the same time they respect the caliphate and what it means. They just say, he's not the one. And these aren't the circumstances under which it will come. And so it's very similar to those who may have read Erich Fromm, a true believer, and in appreciating fascism and how folks who use the public communication apparatus like Hitler and other fascist leaders are able to mobilize people to just great intensity for that cause. And then when you throw religion into there, and the idealized form of religion that so many people share, all bets are off. All bets are off.
I got it. Quickly, how do we, we'll have a longer segment coming up, but we have a minute here. How do we combat this? What's the first and most obvious way?
There are ways that we can combat it among our own citizens, and I don't see that we can't combat this unless we're militarily involved, because it's not going away.
Okay.
People who do things in the name of faith and in a way that gathers momentum from, for example, Boko Haram declaring allegiance and others declaring allegiance and gathering more land, that they're not going away. And the reason we don't experience it, we don't appreciate this, is that they're going after Muslims first. That's their first target. So we have a lead time, and we've been through this before as a country. You either get the problem when it's small, or you have to deal with a problem when it's much bigger.
Okay, hang on. I'll take a breath, folks. I'll take a breath. We'll let Dr. Welner gather his thoughts. We'll take some calls, your calls. This is fascinating discussion. I just want to listen. We rejoin Dr. Michael Welner, forensic psychiatrist, chairman of the forensic panel, architect of the depravity scale. We're talking about the depravity of ISIS, the appeal, the longer-run objective of people who join, the establishment of the Caliphate, how to counter it. The last comments, Dr. Welner, was we need to use the military. Shouldn't we be in a warmer embrace of General Sisi and King Abdullah and those who want to take it to ISIS in military terms and in terms of their own religion?
Well, I think that the President Sisi, El-Sisi, is a very, very important man of his generation, and who is very clear-eyed. And we have the wherewithal to support the coalition of the willing. There is an Iraqi military that cannot fight. There have not been alliances in Syria that can coalesce. The Jordanian military is really just ineffectual. The Egyptian military is extremely powerful. They're American armed. There's a traditional alliance that goes a long way. As far as I'm concerned, and I say this as a very proud supporter of Israel, I see President El-Sisi as a man of peace. He is not a troublemaker. He's not looking as Nasser before him to establish his own hegemony, and he is naturally aligned with the United States. Egypt didn't kill 243 U.S. Marine servicemen. Yep. Iran did. Yeah. All right, and Egypt didn't take American hostages. Iran did, and Egypt isn't taking over Yemen like Syria and like Lebanon and Iraq. Iran has. So it is astonishing to me that with Egypt so willing and so experienced in having to eradicate its own destabilizing force of Islamism, that the United States is sort of slow on the ball. And fortunately, because El-Sisi is a man of action, he's just going to do it without us, and our president is going to be left once again following from behind. Right. But I think that El-Sisi, as far as I'm concerned, he's a man who I don't want to overstate this, but he is the man of the hour. He is the man who can make a difference in a vacuum.
I agree with you. Great. I want to go to callers. People really want to talk to you, Dr. Welner. Jeweler Jeff. We call him Jeweler Jeff in Cleveland. Hey, Jeweler.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for taking my call. This subject is so important to me, and it's been addressed and not answered on TV so many times when the question's asked, how are young people today attracted to people like ISIS? And the truth is that we need to look in the mirror and say, what kind of a society have we raised in not educating our children, not showing them opportunity, but more important, not giving them any sense of meaning in life? America doesn't mean anything. Religion doesn't mean anything. You name it, Boy Scouts, anything that might have given our children meaning in life besides just stuff, has been put down, and leaves a lot of people very, very empty and hopeless.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
and I think they see past all the bad stuff that you've rightly mentioned, because they just see, wow, this has meaning. I can attach myself to something, meaningful.
Dr. Welner.
Jeff, I really appreciate your point. I think the prescription from a leadership perspective, that were I to be advising the White House on this, what I would tell them is, whether this be for the rest of your administration or whether it be the next president, Democratic or Republican, we need a pluralistic nationalist. We need someone who is not only proud of American exceptionalism, unabashedly proud, in the same way that, for example, Harper is in Canada, who is a proud Canadian, but completely pluralistic. There is absolutely no intolerance in Canada to everybody observing as they wish, and yet they have their own restive rejectionist. Pluralistic nationalism doesn't have to be a Democratic or Republican concept, but the importance of this is we have to teach Americans and the Arab world what Americans have done for the Arab world. Americans have died for the Arab world. Americans have died for Muslims. Americans liberated Bosnia. Teach American Muslims how Americans have been murdered trying to help Muslims. This never gets any emphasis. And the exceptionalism projects within so that people can be enthusiastic, and if they want to serve, they serve their country. They can be attracted to a national ideal instead of a messianic ideal, which I think Jeff has raised an interesting point. What's the countervalence to a young person who wants to believe in something and see something igniting when there is a national identity that gets projected that's constantly apologizing for everything, even in the face of how selfless a nation we are? That's got to change.
Good. All right, let me pick up on Jeff's point. I'll keep Jeff on to countervalence. That's nice. I was thinking about Neil Ferguson's book on civilization. He said, civilizations have their codes. They have their canons, their basic works, by means of which they introduce their citizens to the things that matter, the things which define the country or the culture. You're talking about what we need to instruct in, Arab countries. What about in our own country? I mean, I find the neglect of the teaching of American history, American ideas, American ideals, to be one of the worst things we're doing, because we don't make any attachments. I'm all for the truth, by the way. I want to tell the story, the American story, unvarnished. But, if you don't give people good attachments, they're going to get bad attachments, aren't they, Dr. Welner?
Well, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. We have had our growing pains as a society, but as we watch the society of the purified Islam by the book, beyond the beheadings, what we are also seeing is slavery. And when you consider the pains that we have had in our relations between minorities and others, it does remind me of Muhammad Ali's old line when he went back to fight George Foreman in Zaire. You know what he said when he got off the plane? I sure am glad my great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy caught that ship.
Yeah.
We may not be perfect, but we are way ahead of the rest of the world in how we treat each other.
Yeah, and shouldn't be embarrassed to say so, right? I mean, this is the problem. I mean, when I go into the classrooms, I still do. Kids say, gee, you really like this country. Why? And I said, hasn't anybody made the case for it? The answer is no. No. All the way down the line. The college professors, we know what they say. High school teachers imitate the college professors. We even get some of this in middle school, So who's to say a good word for this republic into which you were born?
I think a lot can be said for the United States military, and I'm not even speaking about the guns that they tote. There's so much humanitarian export in the United States military that in the reintegration, even in downsizing of the military, I hope a lot of those folks go into academia, because those are the people whose life experience needs to be imparted, as opposed to professors who did not work in the real world and take their bitterness over not having achieved in an America of opportunity and pass it on to students who can't discern bitterness when they see it.
Dr. Welner, someday in New York, the city of my birth, Brooklyn, I will buy you a drink or a cup of coffee and tell you about my efforts as Secretary of Education to get retired military into the schools and how I was fought tooth and nail by the teacher organizations who said these majors and so on didn't have the qualifications to be in the schools. We'll talk about that sometime.
Well, we'll figure it out on the back of a napkin.
That's it. That's exactly right. I will be the one taking notes. Let's go to Chuck in Jackson, Georgia. Go ahead, Chuck. You're on with Dr. Welner. Thanks, Jeff.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Welner.
Good morning, sir.
Dr. Welner, the first time I heard you was on Bill Bennett's program. This is last year, and I believe that it started off with Islam is as Islam does. And it got me thinking, and you hear a lot of times the radio pundits always talk about radical extreme Islam and this and that. But the thing that struck me, and it kind of struck me to the core, is that if an individual follows Islam and he follows it exactly to the T, he follows it to the letter, then a lot of things that are happening, the beheadings, the taking of slaves, the forcing infidels to pay jizya, force them to convert, all these things have to come to fruition. And people do not understand in America exactly what's going to happen in the future or what's happening in the Middle East. And if they really understood it, I think it would terrify them.
Okay.
And I just wish that your message would be I guess, to different audiences, because Dr. Bennett's audience, I think, has a pretty good appreciation of it. However, the mainstream media, the people who listen to that, they do not. And if they heard just a bit of yours, I think it would open up so many eyes.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Doctor.
Well, I think that, first of all, Chuck, thank you very much for those kind words. What I wanted to just pick up on what you said briefly is the idea that there are people who adhere to their Islamic faith, and they're able to separate the beheadings and the enslavement and to say, hey, that belonged in the 7th century, and I don't have to follow that. And I don't have to follow a political Islam that says that we need Sharia, and I can go to the mosque and I can be devout. And I think that it is incumbent upon our America to basically say, and some countries have already done this, hey, listen, you want to come here and practice freely? That's great. Come on, be who you want to be. You want to use your mosque to plot, to overthrow our way of government? Get out. Go somewhere else. That's not why everybody came here. We all came here to live together. That needs to be done in our communities, and it needs to be done in prisons, because the recruitment to ISIS is not that successful, but it's picking up on the alienated and disaffected in the United States, and that's a huge problem in prisons, where you have radical inmates essentially dictating who the imams are and essentially picking up the dead-enders who are not resilient. So it happens in the community, it happens in the prisons, and we can do a far better job in terms of enforcement in protecting this from seeding the kind of inspiration that for someone will say, hey, I've seen God. I'm drunk on God. I'm going to the Caliphate. It's my turn.
Yeah. Okay. We'll have to leave it there. We could do a whole show. Maybe we will someday. Dr. Welner consents. Thank you, Michael Welner. Thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to have you back.
It's my pleasure, and I'd like to invite your listeners to please participate in the depravity research at www.depravitystandard.org, so we can actually define an evidence-based standard of even war crimes. If we deal with evidence, then we can define things and see things as they are.
We will put a link up on the website, and you saw how seriously your words are taken. Chuck quoted you from a year ago. So thank you, sir.